You'll be driving down a busy road when suddenly you spot them. Strange empty concrete buildings standing completely alone in the landscape. Some of them look like tiny bunkers, others old bathhouses. You'll see abandoned homes and small beachfront structures, featuring tiny side rooms and faded tile work looking right out at the sea. They're just sitting there left behind. By the roadside you'll see an old billboard that's collapsed into the path and just left. They're like quiet little reminders of old businesses, local shops and hotels that once did everything they could to welcome people passing by. At first glance it feels a bit mysterious, maybe even a little eerie. But if you step inside you realise that behind every single one of these cracked walls is a story about progress, survival and the difficult choices families had to make between holding on to the past or moving forward towards a better future. Take the old abandoned power substations scattered across the countryside. Back in the mid-20th century, Tunisia didn't have one giant centralised power grid like it does today. One tiny station might power a whole mining town. Another kept the water pumps running so a family could farm their land. Inside these small rooms, local workers stood all day, manually throwing heavy switches, monitoring dials and keeping the lights on for their neighbours. But over time, Tunisia modernised. The country built a unified national grid with massive automated power plants. The energy sector could send electricity across the entire nation far more effectively than the tiny local stations ever could. Almost overnight, the old substations became quiet. The valuable copper wire was safely recycled. The transformers were hauled away. The power lines were disconnected. What remained was just these empty concrete shells, because demolishing thick reinforced concrete in remote areas costs a fortune. The buildings were simply left to the elements. And they aren't only the forgotten places. If you wander into the older villages, you'll still run into abandoned communal shower blocks and public bathhouses. Today it might seem hard to imagine relying on a shared public space just to wash up for the day. But for many Tunisian families, well into the 20th century, private indoor bathrooms just weren't a thing. These bathhouses used to be absolutely bursting with life. Thick steam filled the air. Neighbours gathered together after a long, exhausting day at work. You could hear the echo of laughter bouncing off the tiled walls. For entire communities, these places weren't just about hygiene. They were social hubs where people met, relaxed, shared news, and stayed in touch. But then progress caught up. The government expanded plumbing networks into homes across the country. Indoor bathrooms became the standard. Families no longer needed to walk down the road to a public wash house because they could bathe in the comfort and privacy of their own homes. At the same time, many rural communities began to shrink as younger generations naturally moved towards the larger cities looking for new opportunities. The funding disappeared, maintenance stopped, and eventually the doors closed for the last time. Now they just sit quietly, fading under the Tunisian sun. You see the same thing happening right on the water with the old roadside and beachfront hotels. Years ago, these modest hotels were symbols of local pride and a growing tourism industry. Travellers driving along the coast would stop for the night, grab a warm meal at the cafe downstairs, and rest up before continuing their journey. For a long time, business was booming. The owners were local families who knew many of their regular visitors by name. But the world kept turning and travel changed. Massive modern resorts, luxury complexes started popping up down the coast. Travellers began looking for massive swimming pools, central air conditioning, private beaches and fast internet. Modern comforts at these small family-run hotels simply didn't have the money to compete with. Little by little, the guests stopped arriving. Some owners tried their best to renovate, others held on for years, just hoping the old business would return. But eventually, the buildings were sealed shut. Across Tunisia, especially in rural valleys and coastal regions, entire properties were left behind. Not because people wanted to abandon their history or forget where they come from, but simply because life became too difficult to stay. During the great modernization projects of the 1960s and 70s, the country built new towns in flatter areas with paved roads, reliable electricity, and access to steady jobs. For families living in isolated villages or older rugged coastal settlements, daily life had always been an exhausting struggle. Carrying water by hand, farming rough land, travelling hours just for basic medical care. So thousands of families made the incredible hard decision to pack up and leave their homes and seaside buildings their ancestors had loved for generations. Houses that once echoed with family dinners, weddings and daily routines were left abandoned. It's a story about technology replacing old ways of doing things. It's about people leaving a hard life behind in search of something a little better. Communities adapting to a changing world, and how progress always leaves physical pieces of our past standing quietly in the background. The walls are cracked and even the windows are broken. You can still feel that life happened here. Someone once opened those front doors every single morning with a smile. Someone once sat outside on those steps drinking tea and listening to the sound of the sea. Someone worked hard inside those substations, caught up with friends inside those bathhouses, welcomed tired travellers into those hotels, and built a lifetime of memories inside those homes. These buildings were never meant to be ruins. They were built with a purpose. They might be empty now, but they were once full of life.